I think what made me realize I could live from my work was the first corporate contract I got back in 2019, which was with Netflix when I lived in Los Angeles. And I worked on shooting Los Angeles for a new office building they were creating. And that was for an entire floor to get on the theme of Los Angeles. So that would have been the time. There has to be a connection with what you're capturing. Whether it's, a person or a building, you have to be passionate about your subject. It's not always necessarily easy or possible, but you really have to try because it'll come through with the image you capture in the final result. I've definitely covered both landscape and architecture or travel, and I think for me the architecture is a little more exciting, trying to show someone's creation in a new light or in a new interpretation is certainly maybe a little more difficult, but at the end more rewarding than just a simple landscape. If I had to pick one place that I really love shooting, I can go back anytime and always find something new to photograph or capturing a different light. That would be Palm Springs. I mean, I think if you haven't been to Palm Springs, you don't necessarily understand the feeling you get when you're there. The time slows down. The architecture is this really beautiful mid-century architecture. There's one tall building, which was the only reason it was there is because someone bribed someone else to build it, but otherwise everything is pretty low, and there's just this history of the mid-century, movement, and it's always going back to Palm Springs is always wonderful. I believe, from my experience, capturing architecture is a bit more complicated than capturing a landscape or nature. Part of it has to do with you want to give a good idea to the viewer of the landmark or the building that's been designed by the architect, and you want to stay true to that vision as well. At the same time, you also need to bring a fresh perspective, because many people before you, unless you're the first one to do it, will have captured that building. That said, capturing landscape or travel imagery can also be very interesting, especially depending on the lighting condition or the weather forecast, as opposed to just a plain, blue sky, pretty mountain type of image. With all the buildings that I've captured, or the architectures that I've captured, there wasn't necessarily a time where the subject was difficult to capture. What is always difficult is you never know what you're going to find when you get to the place. Of course, you'll go if you're able to, you'll go a few days before or maybe a few weeks before to get a sense of the place. But often if you're doing it as a project and you travel to go capture a building, you could get there and it's covered in a scaffolding, or maybe they removed something that you were really looking forward to catching with the image. I do like capturing empty or abandoned spaces, whether it's maybe an abandoned water park or a swimming pool or a cool building. And there was this water park, again, halfway between Palm Springs and Los Angeles, that I would drive all the time and telling myself, I want to take a picture of this, but never stopping. And finally, I decided to do it. And 3 months later, someone set the slides on fire. And so they had to then, the park was going to be destroyed anyway, but this certainly pushed them to move faster because they didn't want any more vandals to set anything on fire in that area. But it made me also realize that when you want to do something, you need to do it right away, because you never know. If I had not taken those photos and waited, then, that fire could have happened. So I think, again, you never know about the environment, what is going to affect when you're going there. The project of Lockdown LA, which was the book I did on the early weeks of the pandemic while I lived in Los Angeles, was, to me, a natural extension to what I've photographed before, because as much as I don't really want to have people in the photographs when it comes to a space or architecture, it gives away the time of when this photo was taken or when the photograph was taken. You can easily look at what people are wearing, or if there's a car, unless it's a vintage car, the model of the car, you can almost pinpoint when in time the image was taken. And I like the idea of making it difficult to know when the picture was taken. Even with architecture, it can bring some, having one or two people in the image can bring some scale to the image. But I do often prefer not to have, people and have, this absence in the image capture. From a young age, I will say I became interested in architecture. When I was, I want to say probably 14 years old or 15 years old, I had to decide what I wanted to do professionally, because in Switzerland you finish school at 16 and then you either continue or you do an apprenticeship. And I knew I didn't want to continue studying, but I wanted to get into a field. And architecture was one that I was interested about, so I did a 1-week little internship with an architect. But then I realized it was mostly drawing and I hated the drawing part, so I decided to go into something completely different, which was more of a safe placeholder, apprenticeship. I regret not going into photography directly, but back then it was certainly professionally a little more complicated to come out of the school and get hired right away. So there was this sort of like, I need to find a career that I know I can finish my studies and get hired. So that was one of the reasons. But I've always been passionate about architecture and interior design. If I had to give advice to someone who would want to get into, let's say, architecture photography, you do need to have some sort of composition and being able to frame your image in terms of perspective to align with the subject being the building. You can train yourself if you don't really have that perfection of aligning things. It helps if you're maybe a little more into this perfect alignment already in your home with your books are aligned, your picture frames are aligned. But I think it's definitely necessary, even if you can fix it later on, with the software and you can straighten things up, which is helpful. To do it correctly at the beginning is a big step. I look at the influences I draw from in terms of my work. There's certainly, in terms of photographer, for example, I really admire Slim Aarons and his amazing career, and especially coming from being a war photographer and deciding that he was done, shooting images that were sad, which he wanted to show. I think it was beautiful people in beautiful places doing beautiful things. Another photographer I really like is Julius Schulman for his architecture photography. With the cinematic aspect of some of the images I capture, I really like both Wes Anderson and Paolo Sorrentino, because they can show you with one frame, they can tell a story. Even though they're already telling a story with a film, but just by one frame, they're giving you something. And then with a lot of the architects, there's a lot of them, that I'm very passionate about. But I think Ricardo Bofill is one of my favorite, and also from mid-century architecture, Richard Neutra and Albert Frey, who is Swiss. I really love the designs that they created. So there are certainly two worlds when it comes to photography. You have the analog world and the digital world. While I sometimes play with the analog world and shooting on film, I much prefer, for my work, to capture in digital format. And I shoot in medium format to get more control over the exposure and what you're capturing and the level of details. But it is to me my preferred way of shooting, because you have a lot more control, and while magic and imperfection can be nice if you're shooting architecture or you're shooting interiors, it's not something you can really afford to do. But for something more romantic as a look, whether it's hospitality images or lifestyle images, including landscape, I think analog is certainly a really good tool. So of course, the big elephant in the room now is AI and what it has done and what it can do. It certainly has already changed how people are viewing photography, because you no longer know if it's actually a photo that was taken by someone or if it was created by a computer. And let's remember that if it was created, it's because most of it was stolen to feed the artificial intelligence. And so it's only creating based on something it knows. It cannot really create something that it hasn't been taught with. I think we already see that there is a backlash with AI where whether it's images or videos, people are kind of growing tired of it. It's an important tool for a lot of fields, including medical, for example. But I think on the artistic world, it's going to be interesting to see how the next year to 2 years, maybe 5 years are going to change. And I think we'll start seeing something where you'll maybe have a stamp that it was made by a human and not by a machine. I don't think you can replace the human eye. And even for example, a curator. I think a curator is going to have a unique eye to put together an exhibit, as opposed to feeding, hundreds of images into a machine and say, I want to create an exhibit on that theme, and you have to pick the images. So it's a useful tool, including for editing, but I think there's nothing that's going to replace the human eye. In terms of trends with what we're seeing in the world of photography, I think for the next few years ahead, I think there's a need for images that make people feel good. Because we live in such a world that's constantly moving. We have, wars. We've had a pandemic. I think people want to look at something and be in, so to speak, a happy place. And while there's a lot of beautiful images that might be more documentary style, I think people want to have something that's making them feel good, especially if they're going to have it in their home, something they can escape to. I think InkPoster bridges a gap that we had with the digital world and the analog world. Most people are experiencing photographs or even, moving images, film series on a backlit screen, whether it's a small one, most of it is a small one on their phone or their tablet. And the other end of the spectrum is printing images, having them beautifully framed so that you can have them in your home. It's very expensive to get something done properly. And what I really like about InkPoster is that you're able, in a few seconds, to display another photograph or another artwork. And it's while still looking like a photograph. It's not something that's backlit, that looks digital, but it looks natural. I think maybe one of the difficult thing as a photographer is to select or curate the work that you want to share, because often you could select not all the photos, but a lot of them. And someone who's never seen your work, whose work is to curate, might come and be like, no, this is really good, and this one maybe less, and so on. But it is a great exercise, especially when you put together a book, to go through your library of images that you capture and put them together. And that's another thing I like with InkPoster, is if you're having a dinner party, I can go through the app and I can select the images I want to show, put them all together and decide, do they stay for an hour or 30 minutes or less, and they'll change, and there's sort of like this reveal of what the next image will be. And so it's a pretty cool feature.